They spent decades building blueprints. You solved it overnight with instinct. Funny how the universe plays favorites, isn't it? While some people drown in data and deadlines, others just wake up one morning and download the kind of clarity that rewrites entire systems. Scientists call it sudden insight, but chosen ones call it Tuesday. Here's the thing. Every era produces a few people who move through understanding like it's muscle memory. While others wrestle with confusion, they simply see. No overthinking, no dramatic build-up, just quiet precision that feels almost unfair. And that's what makes them unforgettable. They don't just find answers, they unlock them, as if the solution had been waiting for their arrival all along. They don't take decades because their mind doesn't operate in the same grid everyone else uses. They move from revelation, not repetition, from connection, not calculation. And when it happens, when you solve in one night what took them half a lifetime, people don't just get impressed, they get suspicious. Because they can't explain what you did without admitting what they missed. So buckle up. Because this isn't about luck or shortcuts. This is about what happens when vision meets vibration, and when the chosen finally remember what they were born knowing. Number one, you solved it because you weren't trying to impress. You were trying to understand. That's the difference that changed everything. Most people approach a problem with the secret hope of being praised for how they solved it. They want to look brilliant, be seen as the expert, or prove that they've mastered something others couldn't. But when you move from that place, your focus shifts from truth to performance. You start filtering your thoughts through ego instead of insight, and ego doesn't care about clarity. It only cares about control. You approach things differently. You didn't care about looking smart, you cared about seeing clearly. That mindset stripped away the noise that slows most people down. While they were busy protecting their image, you were dissecting the core. You weren't afraid to look foolish, to ask what seemed obvious, or to admit what you didn't know. That humility made your perception sharper. Because when you stop pretending to know, you create space to actually learn. And when you learn without pride, truth starts revealing itself faster. People underestimate how much energy they waste trying to appear capable. They build layers of explanation, justification, and defense around their thinking, afraid someone might notice a crack. You, on the other hand, removed all that armor. You stood in the middle of the mess with a simple question. What's really going on here? That's when everything began to unravel in your favor. The very clarity that others were trying to force through intellect came to you naturally through honesty. When you seek to understand instead of impress, your mind becomes quiet enough to hear what the situation is actually saying. That's why solutions came to you so fast, because there was no mental clutter competing with the truth. You didn't solve it through speed or luck. You solved it through sincerity. The same thing that made others overthink made you observe. The same fear that made them freeze made you focus. What took them decades wasn't the problem. It was their pride. What took you one night wasn't magic. It was alignment. When your goal isn't to prove but to perceive, the universe stops resisting you. And suddenly everything complicated becomes simple. Because truth always shows itself to those humble enough to look for it. Number two, you weren't searching for answers. You were searching for alignment. That's why things clicked for you faster than they did for others. Most people chase answers like trophies. They want something they can hold up and say, I figured it out. But answers without alignment are temporary. They might work for a moment, but they never last. Because they come from effort, not understanding. You, on the other hand, weren't chasing something to fix. You were tuning into something that fit. Alignment means you stopped forcing what wasn't meant for you. You began to notice how certain choices, people, and directions drained you, while others lit something inside you. Instead of trying to make everything work, you started paying attention to what flowed naturally. That's when the shift happened. The moment you stopped wrestling with the situation and started resonating with it. The truth began to find you because you had finally become still enough to match its frequency. People who spend years searching for answers often miss the key. They're looking externally for what can only be revealed internally. They read, copy, and chase formulas, but they never pause to check if any of it truly aligns with who they are. You didn't just ask, what's the right way? You asked, what's the right way for me? That's not arrogance. That's awareness. You understood that what's correct on paper might still be wrong for your spirit. The reason things came together so fast for you wasn't luck. It was timing and truth meeting in the same place. You didn't force an outcome. You synced with the current that was already moving in your direction. That's why what took them years to grasp came to you in one clear moment. When you operate from alignment, knowledge doesn't trickle in. It downloads. The dots connect themselves. What they call sudden success is often the result of quiet inner agreement. Your thoughts, emotions, and energy stopped fighting each other, and in that harmony the path became obvious. That's the real secret. Not working harder, but working truer. When your mind, heart, and purpose align, clarity doesn't need time to arrive. It just does. And that's why what confused them for decades unfolded for you overnight. Number 3, you think in wholes, not halves. That's what sets you apart. While most people try to separate logic from emotion, faith from reason, and practicality from intuition, you understand that everything is connected. You don't see the world in pieces. You see the full pattern. That's why your decisions hit deeper and your understanding feels effortless. You're not trying to choose between sense and soul. You've learned how to let them work together. Most people divide themselves while they're trying to figure things out. They tell themselves to be realistic when their instincts speak, or they ignore reason when their emotions take over. That constant tug of war makes them slow and uncertain. You broke out of that loop. You realized that logic without emotion becomes cold and lifeless, while emotion without logic becomes chaotic. You found the balance, that quiet place where intellect and intuition don't compete, they collaborate. That's why you see through situations faster. You can analyze with precision, but still feel with depth. You don't just process facts, you read the energy behind them. You can sense what's true even before it's proven. To others, that looks like intuition or luck, but in reality, it's wholeness. You're not using part of your mind, you're using all of it. Thinking in wholes also means you understand timing. You know when to move and when to wait. You sense that everything has a rhythm, that what's meant to grow takes time and what's forced too early breaks. You don't panic when things slow down because you see the entire process, not just the moment. That's why you don't burn out chasing what's already making its way to you. People spend years trying to master different aspects of themselves, their logic, their emotions, their spirituality. But you learned that mastery isn't about separation, it's about integration. You don't have compartments, you have clarity. And clarity always wins because it sees connections others overlook. You think in wholes because you live from center, not fragments. You stopped choosing between being human and being wise. You became both. That's why what confuses others becomes clear to you. You don't just solve problems, you understand their ecosystem. And once you grasp the whole, the pieces can't fool you anymore. Number 4. You see patterns, not problems. And that's a gift few people ever develop. Most get stuck staring at the surface, reacting to what's loud and immediate. They see what's broken and panic, or they blame luck, people, or timing. You, on the other hand, step back. You don't get lost in the noise of what's happening. You listen for the rhythm behind it. Because every mess, every failure, every setback follows a design. It's never random. There's always a pattern beneath the chaos. And once you recognize it, you stop being surprised by life. That's why you move differently. You don't just fix, you understand. You don't treat the symptoms, you trace them back to their root. When something keeps repeating, you know it's not bad luck, it's feedback. You notice how certain decisions attract similar results, how familiar energy hides behind new faces, how every delay has the same heartbeat of hesitation you've seen before. You study these things quietly, and that's how you gain control without force. People who can't see patterns live reactively. They keep fighting the same battle in new forms, thinking they're evolving when they're just repeating. But you caught the rhythm, and that changed everything. You no longer ask, why me? You ask, what is this teaching me again? That shift in awareness makes you untouchable, because once you know the pattern, you can predict the outcome. And once you can predict the outcome, you can redirect it. You also understand that patterns exist in people. You can sense intentions before words, recognize cycles in behavior, and feel when something's about to repeat itself. That's why you rarely get blindsided. Your awareness isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition at a higher frequency. When others see problems, you see design. You see how contrast builds clarity, how repetition sharpens intuition, and how every obstacle is secretly a diagram of truth. Once you've decoded the structure behind confusion, nothing that happens can shake you, because you've already mapped its logic. That's why you don't need to guess anymore. Life becomes a language, and you've learned to read it fluently. The chaos never disappears, but you're no longer afraid of it. You've realized it was never chaos to begin with, just a pattern waiting to be understood. Number 5, you weren't afraid to be wrong long enough to be right. And that's where your power came from. Most people spend their entire lives protecting their image of being correct. They would rather defend a lie than admit they didn't know. You chose a different path. You let yourself be wrong, awkward, uncertain, and exposed, not because you enjoyed it, but because you valued truth more than appearances. And that's the difference between people who grow slowly and those who evolve fast. You didn't see mistakes as proof of failure. You saw them as information. Every wrong turn gave you coordinates. Every misunderstanding gave you clarity. Instead of hiding from the discomfort, you studied it. You treated your errors like teachers instead of enemies. That shift in mindset turned setbacks into stepping stones. You realized that being wrong wasn't dangerous. It was data. It was feedback from life itself, showing you what needed refinement. While others were busy defending their egos, you were busy gathering insight. They needed to look smart. You needed to become wise. And wisdom doesn't grow in perfection. It grows in correction. That's why you advanced faster. You didn't waste time polishing your image. You were too busy improving your understanding. Most people freeze when they're wrong because they think it diminishes them. But you understood that being wrong doesn't make you small. Refusing to learn does. Every time you admitted an error, you unlocked a new level of clarity. You didn't repeat your mistakes because you didn't shame them. You studied them until they confessed their purpose. That's why revelation came quickly for you. You weren't afraid of looking foolish for a moment if it meant seeing clearly forever. You knew that truth doesn't come to those pretending to know. It comes to those humble enough to question what they thought they knew. And humility is a form of intelligence that can't be faked. You earned your insight through courage, the courage to face what others hide from. You learned that growth has a cost, and that cost is comfort. By being wrong long enough, you gave yourself the chance to finally be right. Not just in theory, but in understanding that lasts. Number 6, you operate from vision, not memory. And that's what makes your path so distinct. Most people live by what they've already seen. They measure their future through their past, repeating patterns wrapped in new packaging. They call it experience, but in truth, it's just the past rehearsing itself. You, however, don't move from what was. You move from what could be. You trust the unseen more than the familiar. And that's why your results look like shortcuts to those still bound by repetition. Experience has its place, but it's limited. It can teach you what to avoid, not always what to create. People who cling too tightly to it end up recreating versions of what they already know, afraid to step beyond what feels proven. You broke that rule. You understood that memory is a reference, not a residence. It's something to learn from, not live inside. That's what freed you. You didn't ask, what happened last time? You asked, what's possible this time? That single shift in mindset turned your vision into a compass instead of a caution sign. Vision requires faith in something your senses can't yet confirm. It's not logical at first glance. It's intuitive, spiritual, and sometimes inconvenient. But that's the point. Vision sees the bridge before it's built. It senses direction before there's evidence. That's why those who rely on experience often can't follow you. Your moves don't make sense to people who need proof before movement. While others revisit old lessons, you rewrite the curriculum. You learn forward, not backward. Your insight doesn't come from repetition. It comes from perception. You catch the whisper before it becomes a wave. You feel the shift before it shows itself in reality. That's not luck. It's a different way of operating. People who operate from memory stay safe. People who operate from vision shift timelines. You understood that wisdom isn't just knowing what worked before. It's sensing what will work next. And that's why you move faster than those still gathering evidence. You're not guided by the past, you're guided by potential. You live ahead of the curve, not because you're reckless, but because you trust the view only your spirit can see. Number 7, you don't wait for permission to think differently. And that's what separates pioneers from followers. Most people need someone to nod before they move, to clap before they believe in their own ideas. They need confirmation, a crowd, or some kind of approval to feel safe enough to be original. You learned early that if you wait for the world to understand you before you act, you'll die misunderstood. So you stopped waiting. You decided that thinking differently wasn't rebellion. It was responsibility. You don't think outside the box. You live where the box doesn't exist. That's why your ideas come with clarity and risk. You've accepted that innovation always offends comfort. People who crave agreement rarely create anything new, because innovation requires friction, the kind that makes others uncomfortable before it inspires them. You were willing to stand in that discomfort. You understood that rejection is just a side effect of originality. While others were still in group discussions about what might work, you were already testing it. You trusted your instinct more than their opinions. You didn't need someone's permission slip to move forward, because you realized that true validation comes from results, not approval. You acted when others hesitated, and that's why you progressed when others prepared. Thinking differently requires courage. Not because it's hard to do, but because it's lonely. Most people don't leave the crowd because they don't want to lose applause. You left because you valued progress more than popularity. You stopped asking, will they like it? And started asking, will it work? That mindset made you unstoppable. The truth is, revolutions never start politely. They don't wait for an audience, they create one. You knew your ideas didn't need a round of applause. They needed execution. And once your results started speaking, validation became irrelevant. You think differently because you see differently. You operate from vision, not consensus. You don't seek agreement, You seek alignment with truth. That's what makes your movement real. It's self-authorized, self-propelled, and self-evident. You never needed permission to begin. You just needed the courage to trust what others were too afraid to imagine. And that's exactly why your difference became your dominance. Number 8, you listen to energy, not just words. And that's what gives you an advantage most people can't explain. Words can be rehearsed, polished, and deceptive, but energy never lies. You've learned to listen beneath the surface, where tone, silence, and intention live. While others get caught up in what's being said, you tune in to what's meant. You can sense hesitation in confidence, resentment in politeness, and truth in a pause. That's why you don't get fooled easily. You're fluent in the language that can't be spoken. Most people only process communication through logic. They hear sentences, not signals. They respond to what's obvious, not what's underlying. But you feel the emotional temperature in the room before anyone even speaks. You notice the subtle changes, a shift in rhythm, a slight tightening of tone, a vibration that doesn't match the words. You've trained yourself to trust those instincts because they've proven to be more accurate than explanations. It's not that you're suspicious, it's that you're sensitive to truth. You sense when someone's energy is off, when their words are dressed up to hide discomfort, or when an environment carries tension even in silence. That awareness allows you to navigate life with precision. You don't just respond, you adjust. You know when to pull back, when to lean in, and when to let silence do the talking. This ability didn't come from trying to read people. It came from learning to read yourself. You've spent enough time in your own quiet to understand emotional frequencies. You can recognize projection, hidden motives, and sincerity because you've confronted those layers within yourself. That inner honesty became your radar. Listening to energy means you no longer take things at face value. You understand that communication isn't about words. It's about resonance. You pay attention to how something feels more than how it sounds. That's why people can't easily manipulate you. You don't argue with what someone says. You simply acknowledge what their energy already confessed. While others analyze conversations, you interpret vibrations. That's how you move through confusion so smoothly. You're not decoding language, you're decoding frequency. And once you start hearing the unspoken, no deception can survive your awareness. Number 9, you realized complexity is just clarity in disguise. And that changed the entire way you see the world. Most people mistake confusion for depth. They think if something's complicated, it must be important. They add layers of jargon, explanation, and theory to make up for what they don't fully understand. You saw through that illusion. You learned that real intelligence isn't about how complex you can make something. It's about how clearly you can express it. You stopped worshipping difficulty. You stopped believing that more steps meant more wisdom. Instead, you began peeling things back, removing what didn't matter, trimming what didn't serve, and questioning what everyone else accepted. And the moment you did that, everything started making sense. Clarity was never missing, it was just buried under people's need to sound impressive. You understood that truth has a rhythm, and that rhythm is simple once you hear it. The world often rewards confusion because it gives an illusion of authority. The more complex someone sounds, the more people assume they know. But you realize complexity can be a disguise for insecurity. People overcomplicate what they're afraid to simplify, because simplicity exposes whether they truly understand it. You weren't afraid of that exposure. You wanted to see things, not hide behind them. When you simplify, you don't make things shallow, you make them sharp. You strip away distractions until only the essence remains. That's why you solve things faster. You're not tangled in unnecessary details. You go straight to the structure, the heart of the matter, the part that actually moves the needle. You also noticed how people complicate emotions the same way they complicate logic. They dramatize instead of digest. They spiral instead of pause. But you don't. You read what's happening, acknowledge it, and respond from clarity, not chaos. That's what gives you peace in situations that unsettle others. Complexity was never your enemy. Confusion was. Once you separated the two, everything opened up. You stopped chasing difficult answers and started accepting simple truths. You learned that the deeper something is, the simpler it becomes. Because truth doesn't need decoration. It just needs someone honest enough to see it clearly. Number 10. You outgrew the need to be seen as smart. And that's when everything started working for you. Most people don't want understanding. They want recognition. They chase brilliance not for growth, but for applause. They want to be the one who figured it out, the one everyone looks to for answers. But that craving to be seen as intelligent becomes a cage. It forces people to perform instead of evolve. You stopped performing. You stopped needing to prove you were smart. And that's when you actually became wise. You realized that intelligence without peace is just vanity in disguise. When you're obsessed with being right, you stop listening. When you want credit, you lose clarity. You saw that being the smartest person in the room often means you've trapped yourself in a smaller one. So you walked out of that room entirely. You began solving not to impress anyone, but to free yourself from confusion, frustration, and limits. That shift changed everything. Your focus moved from ego to essence, and the results started unfolding faster than effort could explain. When your motive is freedom, not validation, you approach problems differently. You don't panic when you don't know something. You're curious instead. You don't fear mistakes. You study them. You don't argue to win. You listen to understand. That humility opened the door to speed, precision, and insight that others spend years chasing. Because when your mind is no longer performing, it can finally perceive. People who need to look smart hold on to complexity, so no one can challenge them. You, however, began simplifying everything. You didn't care about sounding profound. You cared about being effective. And that honesty made your thinking clean. It's why your answers come quicker. You're not dragging ego into the equation. They won't admit it, but that's what they envy most. They're still chasing the spotlight that blinds them. You're walking in clarity that guides you. You learned that intelligence isn't about being admired. It's about being aligned. You stopped proving your worth through intellect and started expressing it through understanding. That's why you moved ahead while they were still talking. You weren't chasing applause, you were chasing truth. And truth always moves faster than pride. Number 11. You have a relationship with stillness. And that's your quiet advantage. Most people are addicted to movement. They equate busyness with progress, noise with importance, and chaos with momentum. They rush to prove they're doing something, terrified that slowing down might make them look unproductive or left behind. But you discovered something they didn't. Stillness isn't the absence of action, it's the birthplace of accuracy. You don't pause because you're unsure. You pause because you're aware. You learned that constant motion doesn't create clarity. It just multiplies confusion. While others are running in circles trying to look busy, you step back and watch. You observe the flow, the rhythm, the pattern. You understand that in silence things reveal their true nature. What feels urgent to everyone else starts to separate into what's essential and what's just noise. That's why your decisions cut deeper. They're made from understanding, not reaction. Stillness sharpened your perception. It trained your intuition. It gave you the ability to sense shifts before they became obvious. While others are obsessed with doing, you've mastered not missing. You don't move because you're pressured to. You move when it's right to. That timing makes it look like luck, but it's really awareness in motion. The world doesn't celebrate stillness because it can't measure it. It can't post it, monetize it, or glorify it. But stillness is where genius hides. It's where insight gathers and clarity forms. You've sat in that silence long enough to realize that thinking isn't the same as knowing. Knowing happens in the spaces between thoughts, when the noise dies down and your perception finally breathes. You don't chase every opportunity or respond to every call for attention. You know that reaction isn't the same as progress. You choose your moments with precision because stillness taught you that the right action at the right time outweighs 100 rushed ones. They rush because they're scared to stop. You pause because you understand the power of seeing before acting. Stillness made you steady. It made you surgical. It gave you the kind of clarity that can't be faked through speed. While they're busy proving they're moving, you're busy positioning. And that's why your steps always land exactly where they're meant to. Number 12. You operate on frequencies they haven't tuned into yet. And that's why your moves don't make sense to most people. You don't follow instructions, you follow intuition. You don't chase trends, you respond to timing. You move when something feels aligned, even if it looks irrational to those still trapped in logic. You're not just reacting to life, you're resonating with it. And resonance always outruns routine. Most people are wired to follow structure. They wait for directions, confirmation, or proof before they act. They rely on repetition because it gives them comfort. But repetition can only recreate the past. It can't reveal the future. You learn to operate beyond that, to move from a place that isn't visible, but vibrational. You trust your inner frequency more than external instructions, and that's what keeps you ahead. This isn't about being spiritual or mysterious. It's about being attuned. You can sense when something is right before the evidence appears. You know when to act, when to wait, and when to walk away, not because of logic, but because your energy recognizes the signal before your mind does. It's an advanced form of awareness that can't be taught in classrooms or manuals. It's earned through alignment and observation. While they analyze data, you sense momentum. You pick up on shifts, subtle changes in tone, energy, or opportunity, long before they're noticeable. It's why your timing feels supernatural to others. You're not guessing, you're listening. The universe has a rhythm, and you've learned how to stay in sync with it. People who can't hear those frequencies think you're impulsive or lucky, but you're neither. You're tuned in. You understand that intuition isn't a feeling. It's information arriving faster than logic can process. It's a download your mind hasn't translated into words yet. And that's why you trust it. You move through intuition, timing, and resonance, while they move through instruction, repetition, and pressure. You're already decoding vibrations they haven't even learned how to detect. That's what makes your path seem unexplainable. You're not ahead because you're trying harder. You're ahead because you're listening deeper. Number 13. You don't chase the how, you become the why. That's what makes your path look effortless. While others are obsessing over methods, formulas, and step-by-step guides, you've moved beyond the mechanics. You've aligned yourself so deeply with purpose that what you do is simply a natural expression of who you are. You don't follow blueprints. You are the blueprint. Your results aren't the product of strategy. They're the reflection of identity. Most people spend their lives asking how. How do I succeed? How do I stand out? How do I make it work? But the how belongs to those still trying to find alignment. Once you become clear on your why, the how unfolds organically. It stops being about effort and starts being about embodiment. You're not trying to achieve. You're allowing what's already meant for you to surface. That's why your actions seem intuitive and perfectly timed, because they flow from conviction, not calculation. You don't need to chase methods because your direction isn't borrowed. You operate from internal truth, not external instruction. That's why people can copy your moves and still never replicate your results. They're imitating your steps without carrying your reason. The power isn't in what you do.